What's going on, guys? Dropadooski here. Today we're going to do our third video in the crafting series for beginners, and this one's going to be all about jewelry. So we'll touch on rings and amulets. If you haven't seen the first two videos in this series, the first one was on flasks and jewels, and the second one was on belts. I will link them in the description below. This video series is intended to give either brand new players or people who haven't done much crafting a foundation to build upon so that they can make a lot more currency during the league and also improve their experience in the leagues by being able to craft stronger gear for themselves without having to rely on currency to buy things from other players. Now today we're going to touch on a couple different topics. First thing we'll look at are the bases and the vendor recipe. A lot of people don't know about the vendor recipe, and it can be very, very powerful even later on at late game. So today we will be doing a little bit on the bench, and we will touch on topics that we haven't gone over just yet in the other videos. So without further ado, let's jump in, look at the bases, and go over the vendor recipe. Jumping into the bases that I like to use, let's start with the rings first. Now, rings are going to follow the rule that I'm looking for survivability at the top or damage based rolls for the implicit. Now when we're saying that, the things that come to mind that I use regularly: sapphire, topaz, ruby, any of the two stone rings, prismatic ring, which gives you all resistance as an implicit, and then if I'm gonna go for straight damage, it's always either gonna be opal or steel rings. Now these are high level ring rolls, these two here. They don't start dropping till eye level 80, so you will see things that drop that damage roll earlier, like the iron ring is also physical damage, and this drops at level 1. Iron rings I use specifically for the vendor recipe. Now vendor recipes are super strong for you new players out there. They not only make for better materials when it comes to crafting in late game, but while you're leveling, you can easily either balance your resistances with the rings or pick up some attributes to level your gems when it comes to the amulet. So we're going to quickly demonstrate and talk about some of the super easy, super fast vendor recipes that I like to use, especially while leveling. Now, whenever you get an iron ring, and these start dropping immediately, you can take that iron ring to any vendor, throw it in for sale, and then depending on what resistant you need the most, whether it's going to be cold res or lightning res or fire res, you can put in one of a gem. So blue is going to be cold, so an iron ring plus a blue gem will give you a sapphire ring. That is going to have an implicit that has cold resistance, helping you to balance your resistances. I would also do this at endgame if I were to get a very strong iron ring, like 80 level with Shaper or Elder Base or something like that. You could go and flip it and turn it into a much stronger implicit before you start crafting. This is the same with all three of the different colors. So blue is cold, green is going to be lightning, and then red will be fire. So keep this in mind early on. This is super strong, and it's going to really make leveling smoother. Quickly touching on a vendor recipe for the amulet. Now for an amulet specifically, when we're targeting and talking about the amulet bases, this is going to be something that gives me attributes to help either finish or complete a build. Let me use gems or use a particular piece of armor that requires a lot more of an attribute than I have from the tree or my gear. So one of my favorite amulets of all is onyx. It gives you all attributes, and you can make these yourself with that recipe. The other ones that are very good, we have jade, lapis, agate, which gives you strength int, citrine, strength dex, turquoise, dex intelligence. These give you duos. Onyx gives you everything. Now over here, I almost never use coral or power amulets. They are increased mana regen or life regen. If you do want to do some regen based amulet crafting, you would want to use marble or blue pearl. These, just like the steel and opal rings, start dropping later in the game, but they're much more powerful. So to demonstrate quickly the amulet recipe here, you can take any amulet. So it could be power or any of those ones that we don't typically want to see. Throw that in for sale and then put one of every color. That's going to immediately create an onyx amulet. That implicit is plus to all attributes, meaning that you can help any character or help your character specifically while you're leveling if you're running shy on dex or strength or int or whatever. This is really strong, and it's really good, especially at endgame. Once again, if you've got those strong bases, but you got a bad amulet, you got a power drop in an 85, go turn it into an onyx before you do some crafting with it. Now unfortunately we can't go over every single vendor recipe in this video, video or we'd be here all day. So what I'm going to do is do a screenshot in the cheat sheet for the rings and amulets, but I will also link the entire document from the PoE wiki, because there's tons of stuff you can do with the different render recipe system, and you guys should really familiarize yourselves with this. I wanted to use this video specifically to mention this during our crafting series. So let's jump over and start looking at the currencies we'll use now that we know what we're going to be utilizing, so that you can then start crafting and potentially get lucky, and then we'll do some targeted crafts. Okay, so now that we've gone through our bases and touched on the vendor recipe a little bit, we're going to jump on in and start using some currency to craft some rings. Now, what I've gone ahead and done is grabbed a bunch of different resistance-based or one damage-based ring. We didn't touch on diamond during base. Diamond is really good as well. It's got that global crit strike chance. Then we've got a couple amulets here, and I want to go over the most used crafting route that I take with most of the random stuff when I'm just going for hopefully something random that can give me a little bit of currency, and that's using alchemies or chaos orbs. Now, of course, I'm not going to use chaos orbs early on, but I do want to show you that you do have the option if, like, specifically you're working on your own ring, like you're playing SSF, you've got a couple C, and you really want to hit something nice on a good drop, but you don't have a lot of mats other than a couple of chaos laying around in SSF. You know, you don't have anything else to use them for except for Xana. So what you're going to do is you'll take a look at these, you'll take these rings. Now, one thing I do want to point out is typically you're looking for anything above eye level 83. When you're going for this, eye level 83 and up are going to give you access to all of the high tiers or tier 1 roles when we're talking about the prefixes and suffixes. So try and target rings at that eye level. If you're below that, of course, ID them and look for stuff. My general rule, especially when starting out, as you're not going to know a lot of the weird random combinations that are going to be great early on, life resistances. When you get nice life or mana or energy shield plus some resistances, you know you've got something there that's potentially profitable. Now, there are some different combinations that are going to be very good, and we can't cover them all in this video. But what I'll say is, as you go through this process over the next couple of months, you will get better at identifying things just based on searching them using the trade macro, and we're going to go through that right now. So we take these alchemies and we just start hitting all these rings and the amulets, right? And we'll just make sure that they're all dialed in, and then we'll go through them and see if we got lucky on anything. So following that criteria, this has high strength, some cold damage, accuracy, some mana. We could throw a resistance on it, but overall, I don't know. This could definitely be okay for like mind over matter with one resistance. It's got the cold damage. Maybe for a cold-based spellcaster, especially considering they normally lack in strength and dex. But this one's not really something I'd be going for. We've got max mana, mana regen, cold damage, and then a ton of intelligence. That's a lot of regen. That's a high regen roll. Some mana as well, so this could also be a mind over matter ring plus the cold. Double cold here, Jesus. Okay, let's jump down. We've got some accuracy, physical damage, int, max life, and mana regen. On something like this, I would definitely have to price check it out, but as you can see, the only resistances you're going to get from this ring are the ones from the implicit on the 2-stone itself. So let's keep moving, see if we got anything better. We've got a super high life roll there. I mean, it's a tier 6, so definitely decent. 71 max life. It's got the fire cold implicit, some mana regen, then lightning damage to attacks and fire damage to attacks. Let's see what those tiers are. We've got a 5 and a 7. It's okay. We could add another resistance, and then we'll price check. And when I say add resistance or add something, that means we're going to use the crafting bench. So some of these we'll definitely go and hit the bench on. Now this has got a ton of int, a ton of dex, a ton of mana, so mind over matter once again. And then we've got another additional cold res here. So with Control C, you can quickly take a look at the different stats, suffixes and prefixes on a given item. And so we've got 93 total mana, 41 cold, 53 total elemental resistances, and then it's got some energy shield, evasion based on the intelligence and the dexterity. So we could potentially add another prefix to this ring and see if it's worth. With the prismatic. Now prismatics have the all res implicit. This comes from a crafting recipe as well, so make sure to dig into that link that we're going to put in the description. That is 3 different types of 2-stone rings. So this one not looking very good. Here we've got real low fire, chaos, strength, and the lightning res. Here 43 strength, super low life roll. That's unfortunate because it has the cold res, the strength, and then it's also got a elemental damage to attacks. If that life roll was higher, we do have an open suffix, so we could throw an additional resistance there. That would have been a great ring. On the diamond ring, so we've got 49 max life, really low fire res, we've got cold damage, and then the crit strike chance. The global crit strike chance is the implicit here, which makes it a really solid ring to craft with. But once again, nothing that I'm really in love with. Let's take a look at the amulets. So we got max mana, elemental damage with attacks, cold resistance. We do have an open prefix, so you could put some life there, so that'd be potentially a high life, high mana, elemental damage, and a res. We could maybe get a couple C for that early on in the league. Then what do we have here? So physical, dex, cold damage, lightning damage, cold resistance. This one you're not going to get any you're not going to get any life on. So with no life or mana, I'm always kind of hesitant. You're definitely going to be utilizing your amulet slot for that, or combined with some resistances. So what I would say overall here, if we were looking for our best ring out of this whole pack, then I would potentially go with, this one had the super high life roll. Plus it had an open suffix, so we could put another resistance on there, and it's got some damage and a ton of mana regen, so that might be okay. This had a lot of mana, then it's got a lot of attributes, and we can throw we can throw some max life on there as well. So I think this ring could be pretty good. Let's focus on these two for now, and let's modify them with what I would normally modify them with. So with the open prefix here, I'm gonna typically by default go and hit it with some max life, and then with this guy we have an open suffix. So based on the current rolls, and it's got fire, cold, I'm just gonna go across the board and we'll hit it with a little bit of lightning res here. And then we'll price check these out and see if they're worth anything. Now they may very well be worth very little, but remember we haven't spent much currency. So to go through this process with Control-Alt-D with the trade macro, we can pull this up. And we're definitely gonna wanna hit some of these attributes. And then I would say we're gonna go with the pseudo total elemental reses, and we're gonna remove that high roll just so that we can open up the range. We're gonna take these attributes, and then we'll also take the max mana and max life and see if we get anything back with this. Let's open on PoE trade and see if we get anything worth. So this one here is listed for 3.9x, but this is 2 months ago. But I'm assuming because it's got so much survivability if you're using Mind Over Matter, plus the super high dex and int rolls, because these are really good attribute rolls, we can say that this is a pretty good looking ring here. So let's go ahead and, just for kicks, I would say this is probably worth a decent chunk of chaos. So let's price out our other ring quickly and take a look at that one. Now this one, it's gonna have the max life roll, which is really nice. We've got, let's go with the pseudo resistances, remove that top, and we'll go with the pseudo elemental damage to attacks because we've got that combo there, and just see what we end up coming back. And this one's going to be fairly low, but I do want to reprice it with the mana regen. Now, if we're looking here closely, we're seeing stuff for 3 and 4C. Remember, this is at the end of a league, so it's not going to be nearly as good as you would see early on. Let's redo that search one more time, and we'll just go with that pseudo max life instead. The pseudo resistances, the pseudo elemental damage to attacks, and then we're also going to take that mana regen because that's a really nice mana regen roll, and see if we get anything a little bit better here. So we've got 10C, this one 40C a month ago, this one is up for 140C yesterday, looking very, very nice, but it's also got a global crit implicit, so it's not the same implicit. I would put this up for about 30C. This is a decent looking ring. So with just that little bit of spamming, we've now got ourselves 2 rings that are definitely of value. They look pretty good. And these other ones, what I would suggest, especially early on, as I went through that process, now I will follow that rule where I'm looking for life resistances or some high damage plus some survivability before I really go out of my way to do some price checking, but it's really not going to hurt you at all to just do some advanced price checking there early on in the beginning while you're learning. Now we're going to jump over and see what you can do with the Chaos Orbs. Now, as Chaos Orbs reforges a rare item with new random modifiers, what you can do with the rings that you've already rolled and gone through and didn't see something of value, you can take these Chaos Orbs and just hit each item and it will reforge the whole thing entirely. Now, I definitely don't do this early on when I I don't have a lot of C, but once I start stockpiling some, I definitely will use a little bit here and there to try and get a secondary shot at making a whole batch of rings, maybe worthwhile or of value. It's not something I suggest, but it's definitely an easy way to reroll any item or reforge any rare in the game. Now, one thing you can do with these rings, now that we're at the point where we've got the ones we want to sell, we didn't think these were value too much. We can put all these in a tab that's up for maybe like 3-4C, and then every day lower it by 1C, and every time something sells, you can pull up an advanced search window and try and figure out why it sold. The thing about ring crafting or crafting in general is getting a better understanding for the different combinations of prefixes and suffixes that is going to sell well. Now we're going to quickly jump over and do one targeted craft so I can show you that with the smaller currencies, and then we'll wrap up the video. The last thing I want to touch on today is some quick targeted crafting that you can do, especially for your own character, to balance out your resistance, get yourself a little more survivability, potentially look for damage, and we're going to use some of the smaller currencies we've already gone over in some of the other videos. Now, as we know, transmutations can turn a regular item into a magic item, so we can immediately say, since we're going for survivability via life or energy shield and then a resistance, we can do this with the ring, turn this into a magic ring, and as we can see with one roll, we have some cold resist there. In an instance where you only have the suffix or the prefix, you can always use an orb of augmentation to then hit this ring with the missing affix there. So we only had a suffix, now it has a prefix. This is a really low life roll, so we don't want to stick with that. So we'll just use some alts to spam this thing until we find something that fits our criteria, right? So we'll keep on rolling. And there we go. So we have 53 max life and 43 fire res. At this point, we can then take a regal orb and upgrade this magic item to a rare. Now we're hoping for another useful stat here. We hit this, we got 9% cold damage, right? So for a cold based build, this isn't a super high roll, but it's a little bit of cold damage. You can take this now, come over to the bench, and then with that open suffix area, you can now add another resistance, right? So this is a cold lightning 2-stone ring. So we'll say we have 43 fire, cold, lightning. Let's beef up. Either one will do. You can pick whichever one you'd like. We'll add some more cold res. Now we have a ring that looks fairly good, right? Now, one other thing to mention since we're reviewing all the other currencies, this is only 12 out of 16 on the implicit modifier at the top. Now, even though implicits are changing in synthesis, so we're going to get some much more complex implicits, you're still going to be using blessed orbs to reforge that top number. So as you can see, instead of 12, it's 14. We can use blessed orbs to get it as close to, if not maxed out. So 15, 16, perfect. So now we have a max implicit roll. We've got a 53 life roll, fire res, cold res, and then the 2 reses as part of the implicit, plus the cold damage. This is pretty nice. Now, what I will also mention here, so we can go over these other currencies, divine orbs at this point, if we wanted to, randomizes the numeric values of the random modifiers of an item. If we wanted to now roll this 53 into a 59, we could hit it with a divine orb. It's going to reforge all of the different prefixes and suffixes, so you can use divine orbs to potentially roll all of those lower values higher to make this ring even more valuable or more useful to you. Let's go through that process with the Jade Amulet, and then we'll discuss some of the other things. So once again, we're going for survivability, something very useful. This has physical damage to attacks. It's tier 5, plus the cold res, plus the dex. We could potentially regal here and get ourselves something else useful. We did get accuracy rating here. Now I'm going to use this as an opportunity to show that once we get to this point, if we don't want to keep this item, we can then scour it down and restart this process, right? So intelligence, 89 max life. That's a nice max life roll. Now we have dex and int. Even though the int roll is fairly low, we could still regal at that point. Get +1 to maximum energy shield, which is terrible. And you just continue to rinse and repeat. And you're going to keep going through this process until you get something that meets the criteria that you're looking for. Now, I know that we're doing this in a very simple manner here, but remember, something to keep in mind is you can do this for very, very nice items, right? So for instance, if this was an Elder or a Shaper ring, we could be targeting, one of the Curse on Hits or something along those lines, and looking for a very, very powerful ring that we could then multi-mod. Now remember, in synthesis, as far as I know, multi-mod will now be a modifier for Elder and Shaper based rings, so it will no longer be on the bench. So it's going to be a lot harder to get some of those really targeted, curse on hit multi-mod rings, but this is the process that you would take in order to do that. And then you're going to use the bench with multi-mod to add a bunch of nice modifiers and have something that's worth a lot of currency or very, very strong for your character. A couple other things I want to mention here that we haven't gone through. If we hit something that looks pretty nice, but we don't want one of the specific things. So if these were two really, really good rolls and we're like, damn, we got a really low lightning res, we don't want this. I do this specifically for very high-end items when I'm trying to craft something that looks more like this wand up here, where we've got the, the elemental damages extra chaos and then multi-mod and a whole bunch of really high rolled things on the bench. In the instance where we wanted to remove something, we can take an Orb of Annulment, hit this, and it has a chance to remove any modifier on this item. It's just going to be random. So if we were targeting lightning resist, when we use that Orb of Annulment, we have a 1 in 3 chance of hitting the lightning resist and removing it. The last thing I'll touch on is Exalted Orbs. This lets you slam an item or effectively add a new modifier to that item. So for this ring specifically, right now we only have 3 suffixes and 1 prefix, meaning there are 2 prefixes available. So if we wanted to, we could take an Exalt, slam this item, and get another prefix, right? We know there's only 2 prefixes allowed. So from here, we could hit this with an Exalt, get an additional prefix, and hope that it's a very, very nice roll, making this ring even stronger. It's pretty risky, but it's also fun once you start getting better at this, making a lot more currency and trying to make really, really high-end god tier items. Alright guys, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. It's been a lot of fun making these introduction crafting guides, and we are going to go ahead and complete this series before Synthesis League comes out. Now, as soon as it is out and we know everything and all the ins and outs of the more advanced techniques in crafting that we'll get with Synthesis, I will do targeted videos on what changes have happened and how you can incorporate that information with the information I've done in these introduction videos. We'll also be doing some other stuff that's more advanced, using very targeted things with the bench as we go forward. Guys, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, as there's going to be a lot more PoE content. Plus, we're going to start touching on some random things as we go forward into the future. Thank you guys once again so much. Don't forget I stream on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/dropaduski. 5 days a week. Come on in anytime, ask me questions live, or jump in our Discord channel. We have got a lot of people going to be setting up groups and getting ready for Synthesis League so that everybody can hit the ground running and go ham. Thank you guys once again. Good luck out there, and we'll see you soon. Peace.